Welcome to OLC 4.0. This is term 1A. We are on class 25 and we are looking at assignment 35. We're probably only going to get to question number 2. If we have time for number 3, that's great. It's here. Otherwise, we'll tackle it tomorrow. This is the new version. We're also going to be looking at the use of the word that clause. This is Jillian Percy, and welcome to our class. If you want to call in and talk to me while we're in the studio, 1-800-465-7144. If you want to talk to me when I'm off the air, 1-800-667-3703. If you need to email me a question, jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, capital G, capital P-E-R-C-Y, space, capital W-A-H-S-A. I am also on YouTube. I'm going to flash you my YouTube channel. Here we go. And this is the playlists tab. When you click on the playlist tab, the very first playlist that will come up is the current playlist. It should all be put in order and all the classes are there up to today's date. If you're looking for stuff that is beyond what we've covered so far, like the next few assignments, you can also look at term 2B and term 2A. Those are from last year, but they would still have a lot of good content. Now, recently, it's a new thing this year, we have a kind of an Uber Wasa YouTube channel that has all of the classes on it. Now, it only has the classes from this term. It doesn't have previous year's classes. But this is a new thing, and each term we will keep on adding classes to this. So if you're taking multiple classes from us, this can be a great place to stop and find everything all at one spot instead of having to kind of bounce all over YouTube and get everybody's different channels. Okay, learning goals. We have a lot of learning goals today by the end of the lesson. And after completing this assignment, I should be able to write complete and correct sentences using appropriate grammar and usage while using a that clause. Construct summaries that clearly state the main idea and include important supporting details. Use knowledge of how to write news reports to create narratives related to other subject areas and personal interests. Use appropriate punctuation correctly, especially quotation marks and other punctuation affected by quotation marks. Use oral language skills to develop content for writing. Use pre-writing strategies to generate ideas for writing, and can explain the purpose and uses of other nonfiction narrative forms, such as incident reports, recountings, or biographies and autobiographies. Okay, so we're going to look at completing sentences using the that clause. And we're tackling this because I noticed when I was marking things last year that sometimes people were using the word that in kind of a funny way. And I realized that that's because it's one of those words that has multiple meanings, and people were sort of aware of the one meaning and not necessarily aware of the other meaning. That was causing some problems. So the first way, and this is kind of the most common way, is the demonstrative pronoun. And whenever I say demonstrative, I'm always thinking of pointing, right? Like if I say that is a snake, I just picture somebody pointing at a snake. It's demonstrating, hey, here you go, here's a snake. It's sometimes called a determiner, or sometimes people think of it as a special type of adjective. Here its function is a pronoun because it's essentially the subject of the sentence. It could also, it doesn't have to be the subject. It could be like if I say my house is that gray one, again, that's not enough description. I picture somebody pointing at the same time. Now, in that sense, it's kind of more or less acting in the same kind of meaning, right? Now, it can also be used as a special type of pronoun that refers back to an entire other clause, and it's using the other clause as the antecedent or the part that comes before. Do you remember before when we were talking about antecedents and pronouns? Pronouns take the place of a noun, which may have been mentioned earlier, and that is called the antecedent. So if I say Jane was so angry, she broke a glass, she is the pronoun, and it's referring back to the antecedent noun, Jane, okay? So that's kind of the simple form. Now you can have a more complex form where that is acting in the form of the pronoun, and it's referring back to an antecedent that is an entire clause or phrase. If I say, let's have a barbecue on Saturday at the beach, I could say, that sounds wonderful. The that is referring back to the let's having a barbecue on the beach, okay? Now, a special example of this is when we use the word that's and an adjective. Often at times when we're responding to a statement that someone has made, and in that case, the word that is referring to the entire statement the other person made, and it becomes the antecedent. So if somebody said to you, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer, and they say, that's terrible, the word that is referring to that entire other sentence. My mom was just diagnosed with cancer. Or my daughter was just accepted into law school. That's wonderful. That is referring back to the entire sentence. My daughter was just accepted into law school. So remember, pronouns never stand on themselves. They are always referring back or pointing back to another noun, or in this case, a noun clause. So you might hear other phrases like, that's great, that's horrible, that's scary, that's awesome, that's depressing. You would never hear that on its own. You would always hear it referring back to something else that someone had said or told them about, right? Okay. Now, that can sometimes be used as an intensifier or a special type of adverb, right? If I say, oh, she is a pretty girl, somebody might comment back, oh, she's not that pretty. And when they're saying it that way, there's usually kind of a negative emphasis. Like they're describing it, but they're describing it and kind of like changing the meaning a little bit in a negative way, right? It's often used when two people are talking and they're comparing their opinion about a person or a thing or event. And essentially they're showing that they disagree, right? The teacher said you were rude. I wasn't that rude, Mom. And it's got a negative. It's almost like I was saying I wasn't rude. I thought their new house was gorgeous. I didn't think it was that nice, right? Like it's sort of nice, but not crazy nice. Now, the other one, this is one where it's kind of confusing, is it can be used as a bit of a conjunction. It can be connecting a sentence to a verb or an adjective or a noun. And in these cases, it's usually working as a subordinate conjunction that's beginning an entire subordinate clause. Remember that those kind of subordinate clauses do not stand on their own, and they must always be connected to a main or an independent clause. So if I said, he always felt sorry that his mom was unable to see her grandchildren, what is he feeling sorry about? The entire other phrase, his mom was unable to see her grandchildren. It was so cold that the water in the toilet bowl froze. The trip was fine until we hit the tree that had fallen across the road. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, let me see if I just come across it. Sometimes what has been happening is people are used to seeing that at the beginning of a sentence. So what they're doing is they're putting a period here and they're turning the first letter into a capital letter and making it the beginning of a sentence. But this type of that is a connector. It has to connect two parts of a sentence. It's not standing on its own. I'm not saying that his mom. I'm not pointing to the mom. I'm connecting what he feels sorry about to what's going on with the mom. So I cannot use it at the beginning of a sentence in that way. Some people I think have gotten so used to seeing that at the beginning that they're automatically cutting their sentence in half. And what's happening is this part is all right, it's independent. But this part, that is, mom was unable to see her grandchildren, it's an incomplete clause now, right? It doesn't make any sense because it needs to be connected to the rest of the sentence. So be mindful when you are using the word that. If it's working to connect two halves of a sentence, don't put a capital on it because it won't make any sense. Then you're saying it has to be linking things. If it's linking things, it can't be the beginning of a new sentence, okay? In this type of that clause, you can also have where there's a verb connected by a clause or a phrase that begins with that. It's really common for reporting verbs, where you're trying to explain what someone else said or told you or admitted or replied. explained. It can also be used for thinking verbs or mental process verbs like believe, think, know, hope, felt, worried, dreamed. So if I say the police said that there have been a lot of robberies recently, that is kind of indicating, hey, here's what their words are. We're sort of using it in replacing quotation marks. My dad told me that he always wanted to be a hockey player when he was little. She believes that if she works hard enough, she will be successful. The principal hoped that the new playground equipment would help recess go more smoothly. Okay, so and again, in that way, it's acting as a linking verb. So I couldn't say the police said, period, and then start a new sentence with that there have been a lot of robberies lately. In this case, that doesn't work because it's acting as a linking word and it needs to link the two sides of the sentence together. You can also have it with an adjective and a that clause. In this case, it's usually some form of the verb to be that's right in front of the adjective. Remember that to be has a multiple different conjugations: am, are, is, was, and were. Some common adjectives for this type of phrase are words like sure, certain, right, important, afraid, pleased, sorry, surprised, worried. She is worried that she will fail the test. He is sure that he has gotten the job. And in this case, it's kind of explaining how the feeling is connected, right? Sometimes people will drop the word that, and it's kind of implied. Mom was surprised dad came home early. If we did it formally, it would be Mom was surprised that dad came home early. But sometimes when we're talking, we might drop the that and make it sound a little more informal. It's not wrong, it's just a little more informal. We can also use noun and a that clause. A noun and a that clause is used when we're expressing opinions and feelings, usually about whether something is certain or whether it's possible. And we again use that with those reporting nouns that we talked about reporting verbs. There's also reporting nouns. So some nouns that are used that way are things like belief, fact, hope, idea, possibility, suggestion, statement, claim, comment, argument. He is also having intensive treatment in the hope that he will be able to train on Friday. Dutch police are investigating the possibility that a bomb was planted on the jet. So in this case, that is explaining the noun in a more detailed manner. What's the hope? The hope is that he's going to be able to train on Friday. What's the possibility? The possibility is that a bomb was planted on the jet. So it's kind of describing things more in a more detailed fashion. That can also be used as a relative pronoun that's introducing a relative clause. And we can use it instead of words like who or whom or which. And that is just kind of considered, again, a little bit more informal than who or which. She picked up the hairbrush that she had left on the bed. I could say, in a formal sense, she picked up the hairbrush which she had left on the bed. I find generally people aren't using which in that sense as much anymore. He was the first director of the National Science Foundation, and he funded science research with an annual budget that grew to $500 million. Again, which would actually be more formal there. Again, not wrong. Remember, we've talked about tone, right? Tone is just kind of casual versus serious, or formal versus informal. So one is just kind of a more formal way of saying it, that's all. So the word that does a whole lot of different jobs. So one thing to be careful of when you're proofreading your work is pay attention to what job that is doing in your sentence. Because as we've said, sometimes people get so used to seeing the word at the beginning of a sentence that they see it and they automatically capitalize it. And it can come at the beginning of the sentence when it's acting as a pronoun or a demonstrative adjective. That was my cousin Vinny. and like you're pointing to your cousin, or that car used to be mine. And again, you're pointing to your car. But when it's acting more as a linking word, where it's a relative pronoun or a subordinating conjunction, it can't be capitalized. It's right in the middle of a sentence and it's linking two parts together. I was scared that my mom might find out. And in all those kind of cases, we don't use a capital letter on it because it is not starting a new sentence. Okay. All right. So moving on to our work. I can explain the purpose and uses of other nonfiction narrative forms, such as incident reports, recountings, or biographies and autobiographies. That's one of the criteria for the course. And we kind of skipped over this last day because I wanted to make sure we got to the first section. But this is all part of lesson 13, narrative text and dialogue. Well, what do I mean by narrative text? A narrative text is simply a story. Now, narratives can be nonfiction, in other words, true, like an anecdote someone's telling you about something funny, or recounting an event, or a biography, or a news report. Narratives can also be fiction, things like novels, short stories. All of these formats are telling stories in the sense that they use chronological order, they have distinct settings, they have characters, but they are organized slightly different. And it's important to be able to tell the difference between these types of narratives so you can easily identify the sequence of events and the main idea. Most narrative text is going to use dialogue or quotations to show what the people are saying. So we're going to take a quick look here at some of the forms of nonfiction and fictional narrative, which you may not be as familiar with. You may have seen, you may not have. This is going to come in handy soon because you are doing some of your own writing for your portfolio, using the events in the novel as your subject. Okay, so an anecdote. An anecdote is kind of a funny word. It almost sounds a little bit like you're going to use it to cure a disease or heal someone who's been poisoned, but that's an antidote. An anecdote is a story. Wikipedia says it's a short or amusing story about a real incident or person. It's always presented as if it's based on a real incident. In other words, you're supposed to believe it's a true story. It may be or it may not. It's often a little bit exaggerated. It usually involves actual persons, whether they're famous or not, often in a real place. And the primary purpose can be to make people laugh, but it can also be to try and show a truth about somebody or to show a character trait in such a way that it makes people see a flash of insight. It's supposed to make you think and laugh and learn about yourself. Often there may be dialogue, people speaking directly to each other in an anecdote. Many of the legends and stories of the First Nations peoples of Canada are reported as anecdotes. Okay. So long ago, when the world was young, porcupines had no quills. One day, when Porcupine was in the woods, Bear came along and wanted to eat him. However, Porcupine climbed to the top of a tree and was safe. The next day, when Porcupine was under a haythorn tree, he noticed how the thorns pricked him. He had an idea. He broke off some of the branches of the haythorns and put them on his back. Then he went into the woods and waited for Bear. When Bear sprang on Porcupine, the little animal just curled himself up in a ball. Bear had to go away, for the thorns pricked him very much. Nanabojo saw what happened. He called Porcupine to him and said, "How did you know that trick?" "I am always in danger when bears come along," replied Porcupine. "When I saw those thorns, I thought I would use them." So Nanabojo took some branches from the haythorn tree and peeled off the back until they were white. Then he put some clay on the back of Porcupine, stuck the thorns in it, and made the hole a part of his skin. "Now go into the woods," said Nanabojo. Porcupine obeyed, and Nanabojo hid himself behind a tree. Soon Wolf came along. He sprang on Porcupine and then ran away, howling. Bear came along, but he did not get near Porcupine. He was afraid of those thorns. So this is a story of why porcupines have quills today. All right, another type of nonfiction narrative is a recounting of events. A recounting of events is kind of a fancy way of saying telling a story, but the difference between a recount and an anecdote is you might tell, see, I don't like this, but they put this in there. One you would tell a police officer. A recount is more straightforward, right? Anecdote is meant to entertain people. Recount is kind of like a summary. It's short, sweet, it's to the point. If I was saying, somebody said, hey, what happened the other night at the party with that guy who got sick? And then you would be very factual. Well, it started like this, and then this happened, and then that happened. And I'm recounting or re-explaining what happened. Then biography. Biographies are a word that comes from the Greek word bio, meaning life, and graphia, meaning a record or an account or a story. And it recounts all the details of someone's life. It tells you where or when they were born, important moments or achievements. And biographies are always written by another person, not the same person. Biographies can be funny or serious, but they aren't usually considered anecdotes, which are generally pretty short, and they're not usually considered just recounts. They're kind of their own special thing. You can write an autobiography about your own life. Usually a biography is tracing all the important things that happened when somebody was very young to the time when they are whatever age they are, or to the time of their death. And it's trying to show what things influenced that person or made them do the things they did. Often a biography is about somebody famous. Can be famous for good things, could be famous for horrible things like Jeffrey Dahmer. But it's trying to say, hey, here are some things that led to this other thing. Sort of tracing the reasons for why things happen. So here's a very short sample word from a biography. Chief Dan George was born as a Giswanath Slahut in North Vancouver. His English name was originally Dan Slahot. His last name was changed to George when he entered a residential school at the age of 5. And it would go on, but they almost always start when they're young, even a baby, and kind of go on from there. Other types, a news report. We've already read lots of news reports in this course, and you've written one. A news report is a special kind of narrative. It tells a story, and it will usually have things like a setting and characters, but it's its own special entity, right? It's going to really focus on the 5 W's and the H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now, fictional narratives are all designed to entertain. They might be just a few pages long, like a short story, or it might be several hundred pages long, such as a novel. Almost all fictional narratives use dialogue or conversations as one element of a novel. Dialogue can show how characters think or feel. Dialogue can also add important information about a place, event, or another person. So a short story is like a mini novel. They are shorter than novels, usually quite short, generally about the size of a chapter. They follow the same format as a conventional novel, but there are exceptions to the rules. There is going to be a plot, usually some sort of conflict. There is a setting, and there is characters. It is best, oh, hang on. I don't like what this part says. There are some examples of short stories written by First Nation students. You can go to www.ourstory.ca authors 09. This is the site of the Canadian Aboriginal Writing Challenge. You can read biographies of the writers as well as read their stories. It might even inspire you to write some of your own. Here is the visual they're trying to talk about. It's a plot mountain. Oh no, it's a different course. Sorry, I was thinking about one of the things we've done already. It starts off with the beginning of the story. Usually they show you the characters in the setting. Then they talk about rising action, like things begin to get more exciting and get in the way. What types of conflict are present. The climax is usually the most exciting or suspenseful part. And then things begin to get wrapped up or resolved. That's the falling action at the very end. They kind of wrap everything up in some way, right? Here, they were talking about the monkey's paw, which is a pretty famous story, although we don't cover it in our course. If you like horror stories, though, the monkey's paw is pretty much of a classic if you wanted to read that. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the actual assignment here. I can use punctuation marks correctly, including quotation marks, commas, periods, question marks, and exclamation marks. I can use my oral language skills to develop content for writing, and I can use knowledge of how to write news reports to create narratives that relate to other subject areas and personal interests. Okay. Oh, we talked about that already. Okay, so here are a bunch of the rules to punctuate the dialogue. Hopefully you read those already when you looked at exercise 1 in our last class. You're also going to need them for exercise number 2 that we're about to talk about. So I'm going to kind of quickly review them, okay? This is about direct quotations. Direct quotations are when you want to say the exact words that somebody said. So first of all, we use quotation marks to begin and end a direct quotation that came out of a character's mouth. And remember, we've talked before about this. I think most people know this, but just in case, a quotation mark, oops, hang on. They look like, hang on a second. I'm doing two together. There you go. Kind of like a 66 at the front and then like a 99 at the end. Okay. So if I said, my Gookum said, and there's my beginning quotation mark, I am going to the powwow. And then I would close my quotation mark. I'm not sure what this is there for. Okay. I'm not going to use quotation marks if I set off an indirect quotation. Remember how we were using, I'm going to add this here. We were talking about that clauses. She told me that she was going to the powwow. In this case, I'm not using her exact words, so I don't need to use quotation marks. Another example would be David said that that was the best bannock and bologna sandwich he ever had. Okay, no quotation marks needed if it's not exact words. Generally, we try and use a tag to explain who is speaking and how they are speaking. It's not required for every single one, but when you don't use it, you run the risk that your reader might get kind of confused and forget who's talking. So Jim said, the little boy cried, the teenager yelled. Those are all examples of tags. If the tag comes before the quotation, put a comma right before the quotation starts. So Becky said, comma, I'm so glad to be home. If the tag comes after the quotation, then you don't need a comma after the tag. You would just probably put a period to end the sentence. If the tag comes in the middle of two quotations from the exact same speaker, then you do still use the comma after the tag. Number 4, the first word inside the quotation mark is capitalized as long as it is the beginning of the sentence for the speaker. Number 5, both parts of a divided quotation are enclosed in quotation marks, but the first word in the second quotation isn't capitalized unless it also begins a new sentence. If I said, this soup, comma, the elder said, tastes just like my Gookums, then I don't need a capital letter here because it's not a new sentence, right? If I had a whole new sentence there, then I'd put a capital, but otherwise, no. Number 6, when the quotation comes at the beginning of the sentence and should end in a period, we change it to a comma to make it clear the sentence isn't done. But exclamation points and question marks don't change. So here are some examples. I am so sleepy, comma, said the dad. Help, fire, exclamation point, yelled the little girl. Are you crazy? Question mark, John asked. Okay, so we only use the comma to replace the period, not for everything. Number 7, when the end of a quotation is also the end of the sentence, the period is usually put inside the quotation mark. See here where we have the period and then the quotation mark. But here's the thing, it's doing double duty. It's ending the quote, it's also ending the entire sentence. We don't put a second period there to end the sentence. It just looks kind of silly. This is also true for question mark and exclamation points, as long as the way the quote ends is the same way that the author wanted the sentence to end. So it says, she asked, are you crazy? The question mark is going to work for both. If I have, he yelled, stop it, the exclamation point works for both. Occasionally, the sentence in the quotation might need 2 different types of punctuation. And then in which case, the quotation punctuation would go inside the quotes and the sentence punctuation would go at the end of the sentence outside of the quotes. This is really awkward and you're not going to see it very often because it does just look so strange. If I say, is it true that he yelled no? Well, he's yelling, so there's an exclamation point, but I'm asking a question, so I have a question mark. It's really awkward. Okay, when you write dialogue, begin a new paragraph whenever the speaker changes. Sit down, the teacher said. Let's talk. Are you going to do this every day? Now, I can't just keep on. See, if I did this and made it part of the same sentence, it's confusing because up until now, the one person's been talking, but suddenly it switches to the other person. I'm not going to realize that as I'm reading along. So the way we show the reader it's a new person is we start a whole new paragraph. Okay. And each time a new person talks, then we switch it. You don't have to switch it for every single sentence, but only when a new person talks. All right, now this is super tricky stuff. It does come up a little bit in this course, but this is kind of more advanced stuff. When you are writing a quote that's only part of a sentence, like if you're doing a research essay, don't begin that quote with a capital letter unless the person you're quoting from had it as a capital or it's the very first word in your sentence. So here I have Robert Checkwich admitted he had not found many novels that were based in First Nation communities. And there's no capital there because it's not the beginning of a sentence. Now, I would normally put a ... to show that there were some words before he said that, but that's just me. It's not required. Number 10, quotes within a quotes. If you need to have one character quoting something another character said, then you use double quotes for the main dialogue and a single quote for who they're quoting. And again, this is awkward and tricky, and I don't advise you to do it very often. So big quotes or double quotes. And then he said, single quote, "This is your last chance around here, Jimmy." What a jerk, he said. So here I ended the first quote. That's him quoting what the guy said. And then this double quote ends what he is saying. Again, it's a bit tricky. I would say that if you're not sure you understand it, try to avoid using it. And lastly, number 11, use a pair of dashes to indicate an abrupt break in thought or speech or an unfinished statement or question. This is if you have people talking and one person is interrupting the other person, you show that by using a dash. So here we've got, first of all, he said, if you can learn a simple trick, son, you'll get along better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Huh? Until you walk 2 moons in his moccasins. So here you can see they put a dash there to show, hey, he wasn't finished talking, he got interrupted. And then you put a dash here to show this is the rest of the sentence that he was about to say. So there's a dash at the end of the part where he got interrupted and a dash at the beginning when you finish the sentence. Okay, so moving on to exercise number 2. This has been changed since last year's course. Okay, so if you have taken this course before, know it. This is different, deliberately so. That previous assignment caused a lot of problems. People had a really hard time with it for some reason, so we have changed it. Okay, this part is worth 20 marks. You're going to write a page of dialogue between 2 characters. You must give the 2 characters names, and the topic of discussion can be any school-appropriate topic. Some possible choices are things like a job interview, a powwow, graduation day. You're nervous about starting a new job. You're moving away. You're buying a new house. The dialogue should reveal, sorry, it says review, but it should say reveal. Okay. Reveal something about the character's feelings and personalities and not just give information about the event. This can be based on a real-life conversation you've had if it helps you start. It does not need to be word for word. Feel free to add more dialogue or change the dialogue that you think will be appropriate. Okay. Here is the success criteria. This is what I'm looking for to see how you're doing when I'm reading your dialogue, okay? First of all, the dialogue should be at least 3/4 of a page long. Now, that sounds like a lot, but remember, every time a new person speaks, you start a new paragraph. So dialogues can be quite short and still take up a lot of space. Make sure that you do, in fact, remember to start a new paragraph every time the speaker changes. Use quotation marks around the speaker's words to show that they're the exact words. Use tags to indicate who is speaking and how they're speaking. Use your end punctuation correctly. That's the periods, question marks, exclamation parts. And here, I have used commas in place of periods inside a quotation unless the quote is at the end of the sentence. And then finally, my dialogue reveals interesting information about both characters' feelings, personalities, and the event. Okay. So, important point. The very last part where we're talking about it's revealing interesting dialogue. You want to be careful not to write dialogue that doesn't mean anything and has just kind of not very interesting. Sometimes people get kind of trapped and they're not sure what to do, so they write very, 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 very basic stuff like, "Hello," said Brad. "Hi," said Carol. "How you doing?" said Brad. "I'm fine," said Carol. Okay, well, I mean, his characters are talking, but I don't know anything about them at all from this dialogue. And even though in real life we often begin conversations this way, you don't have to start your dialogue with these greetings. You can just jump into the exciting parts of the conversation, just like they do in movies. Okay, you can skip the boring stuff. Dialogue can reveal a character's feelings. Sometimes, depending on who they are and what's going on, they might state how they're feeling very directly. Like, "My little sister said, I feel sad." But it can be a lot more interesting when the character's describing actions or events, and you have to kind of infer or read between the lines to understand what they are feeling from the words and the tone they use to talk with. So here's an example of that. Mom said, "I wake up every day and I don't even want to get out of bed. All I can think about is your father and how much I wish he was still here. When I do get up, I feel like there's a gray haze between myself and the rest of the world. No, I am not doing okay, Jennifer." So mom is describing something that sounds something between sadness and depression, but she never said, "I feel sad." She did describe what's going on in her mind and her actions. And when you look at that, if you understand and have felt those things before, you can go, "Oh, mom's feeling sad." That's kind of a more interesting way to reveal your character's feelings. Dialogue can also reveal a character's personality. So, the American Psychological Association defines personality as the enduring characteristics and behavior that comprise a person's unique adjustment to life, including their major traits, interests, drives, values, self concept, abilities, and emotional patterns. So, you can use dialogue to help convey a person's personality traits, what they're interested in, what they value, what their abilities are like, and even how they think about themselves. So I'm going to start with a dialogue that shows values, right? So here's one. Mom said, "We are having Gookum's birthday dinner at 6 o'clock. Don't be late because dad has to go to work at 8 o'clock, so we want to start right away. I told Dean I would go fishing with him later on. He was planning to stay out late today as it's his first day off for a while," Tom told her. Well, you just have to tell Dean to drop you off by 6 o'clock or tell him you'll go on another day. Gookum will be sad if you aren't there." Okay. So mom's first words here at the beginning are showing she values her own mother, her Gookum. She values being punctual or on time because she's telling him be on time. And she also is valuing her husband's work schedule. Hey, we're doing this to kind of work around my husband. Tom's words, on the other hand, show that he values his friendship with, sorry, Dean, not with Tom, definitely more than he values being on time, and maybe even more than he values his Google, right? He's showing, though, that he does value his mom's opinion because he doesn't just ignore her or walk off or get mad. Instead, he kind of calmly explains the reasons why he might be late, even though she would rather he be on time. Then, with mom's next words, she shows, well, I really value you obeying me and respecting my values. And she basically insists that he place his Gookum's feelings as a higher priority than Tom's feelings. All those things is unconsciously showing what things those people value, right? Mom values one thing, Dean values something different. Everything they're saying shows what is important to them, right? All right. Personality traits. So there are so many lists of personality traits. Like I've literally seen lists of like 500 or so. The one thing you're going to want to see is some personality traits are considered positive. In other words, we think well of them and we tend to like people who have those traits. And some personality traits are considered negative. In other words, we don't like these traits, and often we don't feel good about people or even ourselves when we have these traits. So things like adventurous, affectionate, ambitious might be positive, but aggressive, arrogant, cynical, dishonest, those might be negative. So these are some different personality traits, and you might be thinking about that when you're having your person talk to each other. So if I was going back to this conversation with the mom and Tom here, what personality trait? Well, mom is being very direct. A kid might say she's being bossy. Tom is being very honest. He's not being sneaky or deceptive. Depending on the parent, some parents might feel like he's talking back and being rude. But I would say he's not being rude or defiant because he's not swearing or getting mad or yelling. He's just explaining things very straightforward. So I think he's being reliable and trustworthy, right? So just like these words are showing what they value, those words are also showing a little bit about their character or their personality, what they're like inside. Dialogue can also reveal information about an event. You got to be careful about doing this. You want to make sure it sounds natural and not like a news bulletin. This can be hard to do. And I'm not convinced I did it well here. I'm giving you an example. It still sounds a little bit stiff, I think, but it was kind of the best I could do. So see what you think. Um, hey, you still coming with us to the Thunder Bay Fair this weekend? I get off work at 5 o'clock on Friday. Come pick you up if you're still going, John asked David. Oh, yeah, try leaving without me. I'll be chasing you down the road. The ticket price isn't so bad. I can find 20 bucks easily enough. But all the money for the food vendors and the rides adds up quick. David added, Jessie's coming too because she wants to go on the rides. She keeps raving about the Ferris wheel we rode last year. I think the Ferris wheel is boring, but I love the zipper where you get tilted upside down. I can't wait to see the fireworks. That's always my favorite part of the fair. I'm bringing a blanket so we can stake out a good spot this year up near the front, David explained. So here I know there's a fair. I know it's going to be happening on the weekend. It's 20 bucks to get in. There's food vendors. There's different rides like a Ferris wheel, like a zipper. Later on, there's going to be fireworks. So these guys talked, and hopefully I conveyed a little bit about their personalities, but I also conveyed a little bit about the event. Okay, but I didn't do it by just saying, at this event, there will be food vendors and there will be rides. There will also be a ticket price of $20, right? You try and make it sound natural. Like I said, I don't know if I did it perfectly, but I did the best I could. Okay, so when you're getting started, you got to choose a topic. Think about what your characters might be talking about. It can be a topic about something that's actually happened to you, or it can be completely fictional and made up. Remember how we were talking about both fiction and nonfiction can have a narrative storyline? So that's what we're doing. We're just kind of doing our narrative through dialogue, okay? So some possible choices for a good topic include things like a job interview, a powwow, a graduation day, starting a new job, moving away, buying a new house, buying a car. You want to make sure the event is big enough that you have something to say about it and that hopefully involves some strong emotions as well. If you choose something really small, like, oh, oops, I fell off my bike, often there just isn't enough to say about it. And then you're stuck thinking, oh, I can't think of anything. And it's just really because the event's too small. The bigger and more interesting event you pick, the more you're going to have to say, and the easier it will be to write a page worth of dialogue. Okay. Choose your characters. Now, you can use two entirely imaginary characters, or you can picture yourself talking to someone you know. You can even picture a real life conversation that you actually had. It could be somebody who's a friend, a partner, a family member. Think about what kind of relationship the two people are talking might have with each other. Maybe it's two friends, maybe it's a husband and wife, maybe it's two common law partners, maybe it's a boss and his employee, or it could be a teacher and a student, or a doctor and a patient, or a parent and a child. Could be two students talking together or two strangers. One thing to think about as they're talking is, do they have the same level of power, or is one of the persons in charge of the other one? Because that can change how they talk to each other. Like two friends have the same level of power, but a doctor and a patient, the doctor's got a lot more power than the patient. So they might talk to each other very differently. So that's one thing to be thinking about when you think about the relationship. Also think about, who are the characters? What's their age? What's the gender? What are their jobs, their residence, their heritage? And how are those things going to affect the conversation? They won't necessarily affect every conversation, right? But they may affect some of them. What are the characters like as people? Are they honest or are they deceptive? Are they chatty or are they quiet? Are they funny or are they serious? Now, that part will definitely affect how they talk, right? What is their level of language? We've been talking about this for the last few assignments. Remember that level of language is vocabulary, like what type of words do they use, and how complex are their sentences. If you have two 10-year-olds talking to each other, you're going to be using a lot more simple vocabulary than you might with, say, a doctor talking to another doctor, right? And if you have an adult talking to a child, the adult might be using really high vocabulary and complex sentences, and the child might be using very simple vocabulary and very simple basic sentences. And that's kind of part of you getting across their age and differences, right? What is their tone? Remember, tone is kind of about their emotions or what emotion they're inspiring in you. And how might a tone change through the conversation, right? If someone might be starting off a conversation calm and then they get mad in the conversation and then maybe they get sad, or it might change. One person might have one tone, another person might have a completely different tone. How can you convey that with your word choices? Okay, you want to focus on the content first rather than the punctuation. I would say write the dialogue, write the conversation, and then you can go back and punctuate it afterwards. Now, if you feel like you've got a pretty strong sense of how to use quotation marks, go ahead and use them as long as you go along. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm just saying for some people, doing this kind of punctuation really stresses them out, and trying to think about that and think about what they're going to write can be confusing. So if it's overwhelming, just write your content first and then you can go back. So for here, I've got a conversation going with my mom about moving away from home for a new job. And while this event did really happen, I really don't remember what we said to each other. It was like over 20 years ago. And I'm honestly just imagining that part of the conversation. Okay. So, oh, I thought I had it there. Okay. I'm going to do that in a second. But once you've gone through once, you're going to want to revise any content, and then you can go back and edit and do the punctuation. Yeah, see, and I'm sorry. Sometimes I move slides around and they don't always end up in the right spot. There we go. So here's my rough dialogue. I only have a few minutes. I'm just going to kind of go quickly here. If you're looking at this on my screen, if you're not on the radio, but you can see, I haven't put any of the quotation marks yet. It says, "Hey, Mom, can we talk?" I said. "Sure, honey. What do you want to talk about?" she asked. "Let's sit down," I said nervously. "Remember that job interview I had a couple of days ago? They've offered me the job." Mom said excitedly, "Good for you. I'm so glad to hear that. I know how hard you've been trying to find a job." I said, "The thing is, they need me to start the job in about 2 days." Mom said, "Well, that's fast, but we can get you ready by then. Where is the job?" Now, this is really short. This is not long enough. I would need to add a lot. But you can see I'm going to be setting this up, right? I have not, to me, I would want to do more with the emotions and do more with characters. I would probably go back and revise this a few times to kind of get more into the conversation. And like I said, it needs to be longer. Okay, so hang on. Yep. All right. Think about, does your conversation make sense? Is it interesting? I feel like mine's kind of so-so. I think I need to jazz it up to make it more interesting. Is it long enough? No, mine isn't. It needs to be 3/4 of a page. should I fix anything? Then you would fix everything, and then you would go through and you would actually do the punctuation. Oh, I'm almost at time. Oh, but my friend is not going to be here after. Okay. Yep, did that. When you're doing the punctuation, I would be careful to do one issue at a time. Like I would want to check for capital letters at the beginning of every sentence and every quote and do that through the entire thing. Then I would want to go back and make sure the quotation marks surround the entire speech of the character. Then I might go back to make sure I've got periods or exclamation points at the end of every sentence. I would do each thing all the way through. If you're trying to check for like 6 different things at once as you're reading, inevitably you're going to forget some of them. You're going to focus on one and forget the other. Okay. Oh, we're not going to have time to do this today. Normally, I would go through and punctuate the dialogue. The big thing, obviously, is you make sure that you have your starting punctuation where the words begin. You have your end punctuation where the words end. I don't need to change that question mark because I'm asking the question, and I already have a period there, so that part is good. Okay, so give this a shot. I'm just kind of looking that you can work on a narrative and also that you have some chance to practice using quotation marks, okay? Because we don't always use those in the type of writing we're doing. If you have any trouble with this assignment or with any other assignment, give me a phone call and I'd be happy to talk to you. I will be here about 4:30 if you want to give me a phone call soon. And hope you're doing well with this assignment. Talk to you tomorrow. All right.